Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And what we're going to discuss today is what I actually do, archaeology. Specifically, the archaeology of the classic Maya, and my own research at the ruined city of El Peru-Waka. Now, this is a talk I gave about 8 or 9 months ago at the STEM Club, that's Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, at TJC. And it involves what archaeology is and what archaeology does and what we can learn from a scientific approach to the human past. And it involves tombs and burials and human sacrifice and what the dead can teach us about social organization. And it is entitled The Dead of a Rainforest City, Anthropology and the Funerary Archaeology of El Peru-Waka, Guatemala. And we start with a fairly modest burial, El Peru-Waka Burial 19, which I excavated, a really long time ago with Varinia Matute. And I use this as an example because, for one, it's a really good example, and two, it's a really good photograph. Now, the first thing you need to understand about funerary archaeology in the rainforest is that the rainforest biome is actually quite hostile to human remains. And skeletal material does not preserve well in the soils of the rainforest. And often what you'll get is what you see here, that we have to excavate around the bone. And as soon as we actually start to move the bone itself, it really fragments and it powders and it turns into like basically just bone dust and small fragments that have to be like almost pieced together back in the laboratory. So the result is that we do a great deal of osteological analysis in situ, in the field. So here, Varinia Matute and I have excavated around the bones to study them as best as we can before their removal and before a lot of information is lost about them. So let's actually analyze El Peru-Waka Burial 19, this individual who was placed in the foundation of a staircase of a palace. And when we start looking at this individual, almost immediately we notice that the skull is a very unusual shape. In fact, the skull has undergone something called tabular modification or tabular deformation. And this is when the skull is changed. They change the shape of the skull in infancy. Now, this doesn't affect development at all, and indeed, it's merely a type of body modification. Indeed, all cultures practice some degree of body modification, and cranial modification is not unusual in human cultures. Here are some different types of cranial modifications, because an infant's head can actually be shaped while young, and the ancient Maya were particularly interested in tabular modification. As you can see right here, it was considered a mark of great beauty to change the shape of the skull to make it look more like the beautiful maize god. Now, the thing about tabular modification is that it is more common among the nobility of the classic Maya. It's not restricted to the nobility of the classic Maya, and commoners did engage in tabular modification of the skull, but much, much less frequent. So more or less, when an individual has tabular modification, it is an indicator of elite status, but not a particularly strong indicator of elite status. So this individual is probably of noble birth. Probably. All right, what else can we tell about this individual? Well, let's focus in on the age. The individual had fully erupted third molars. Now, this generally occurs around age 21. Your third wisdom tooth fully emerges. And thus, we've got an individual at least in their early 20s. But teeth are not the only indicator of age, and we can check with other indicators on the skeleton to see if this age is confirmed. And what we see, in fact, yes, other indicators suggest that this individual was in their 20s or 30s. On the skull, we have very prominent cranial sutures. Now, when you're young, these cranial sutures begin to fuse, and by the time you begin to reach middle age, they've almost completely fused. So the result is that with this individual having really prominent cranial sutures, we know that this individual never reached middle age. They never probably exceeded 50 years old. And if we move down to the femur right over there, we see that the femur has fully formed epiphyseal unions. Because when you're born, your femur is actually, I think, 4 or 5 separate bones, and they fuse together as you age. And the diaphysis, the shaft of the femur, perfectly fuses with the epiphysis, the end of the femur, at around 17 years of age. This individual then had a fully formed epiphyseal union, thus they were at least aged 17. So these two other indicators of age agree with the dental information. This individual was fully mature in their 20s and 30s, probably in their 20s, as confirmed by the teeth, the cranial sutures, and the epiphyseal union of the femur. But what else can we learn about this individual based solely on osteological analysis? And we can move to their sex, their biological sex. If we again look at the skull, we notice that the individual had a large mastoid process. Now, a mastoid process is the bone attachment located here, just underneath the ear, and it's a muscle attachment for the sternocleidoid mastoid, which passes on the side of the neck. And basically, biological males tend to have a very large mastoid process. Biological females have a diminutive mastoid process. So this individual with a large mastoid process is almost certainly a biological male. This is confirmed when we move to the pelvis, and we examine the subpubic angle, which is quite triangular. Biological males have a triangular subpubic angle. Biological females have a more arched or curved subpubic angle. So together with the triangular subpubic angle and the large mastoid process, we can clearly say that this individual is a biological male. Also, the head is in a very unusual position. The chin is pressed directly against the center of the sternum, which is located right about here. I actually can't show you what this would look like, not without killing myself, because the first, second, and third cervical vertebra right back here are completely crushed. And the angle of the neck with the chin pressing directly against the center of the sternum is, as they say, inconsistent with life. All right. In other words, the individual's neck is severely broken. So let's add all of this up. What do we have about this individual? Okay. So this individual in burial 19 is a biological male. He is between 21 and 50 years of age, with 21 to 30 being the most likely. The individual possesses a tabular modification of the skull, which is indicative, it's not definitive, but it is indicative of elite status, and the individual has likely traumatic injury to the upper neck, to the cervical vertebra. So that's what we can tell just through the osteology. Let's move on to the archaeological context of this individual and see what that can tell us. Now, Varinia Matute and I located this individual inside a elite residential compound, a palace of sorts, located in the Grupo Tolok, and that's what we're looking at right up above me. We've placed a tarp over the burial, so as we were excavating, the staircase material didn't fall and disturb the burial. Okay, what was the Grupo Tolok? It was a fortified elite residential compound which contained an ancestral shrine, which is there. That ancestral shrine had the sexy name of M1415, and it had a large partially masonry structure called structure N142. Now, burial 19 was discovered with the excavation of N142. The individual was placed inside this staircase that you can see right above me, in the foundation of the staircase itself. But let's take a slight detour into that ancestor shrine, into M1415. And this is what an ancestor shrine looks like. It's a multi-room structure, probably a former residence that was converted into an ancestor shrine through the power, wealth, and prestige of the individuals who were buried there. This is what you do with the honored dead. You place them inside reverential ancestor shrines, buildings where you can make offerings to them and get their advice about problems that you face in your life. This is how the honored dead are handled. And inside these ancestor shrines, you often find very elaborate funerary materials. Right up above me is El Peru-Waka Burial 21. And Burial 21 was a very nice burial. I mean, it wasn't a tomb, but it was a large crypt containing, 5 distinct vessels, and really high-end vessels too, really, really pretty ones. Here is vessel 4 from El Peru-Waka Burial 21, a very famous Eek-style polychrome, which showed a kneeling figure presenting a war banner to a king, and the name of the king was Tayal Chan Kinich. And the kneeling individual had the title of Ba-Ahau, First Lord. And this story is told of this First Lord presenting a war banner to this king. It's a really, really interesting vase. One of the few Eek-style vases that has been located archaeologically in the whole of the Maya region. This is a really rich individual. This was a wealthy and powerful lord. Indeed, Burial 21 probably holds the remains of that Ba-Ahau, of that first lord, a very prestigious individual. This is how you bury the honored dead, reverentially, inside an ancestor shrine with elaborate ceramics to accompany them into the other world. This was not done with Burial 19. Burial 19 was placed in the foundation of a staircase. He's underneath the steps. You walk on his body every time you walk on that staircase. He's not buried with these elaborate polychromes talking about foreign kings and first lords. This individual was buried on a pile of broken ceramics, indicative of feasting material, all right, with his neck broken and his chin placed directly onto his chest. And he wasn't alone either. In addition to Burial 19, he was buried with Burial 18, which was an infant placed below his feet, again, placed on a bed of shattered, smashed ceramics. Let's look at this in profile and you see what I mean when I say that these two burials, Burial 19 and Burial 18, were both placed in the foundation of a staircase. And you can see it right up above me. So basically they excavate down to bedrock. The ancient Maya deposited all of these smashed ceramics, which we'll talk about in just a tick. And then they buried these two individuals, an infant, Burial 18, and of course, Burial 19, of whom we're discussing quite a bit. And then they proceeded to build the foundation right on top of these individuals, and then the staircase on top of those. Again, this is not a reverential burial. This is not what you do to a beloved brother or a beloved father or an honored grandmother. Something different is going on here, and we get a hint about it when we actually turn to the ceramics themselves. In Guatemala, I spent the better part of 3 months taking this bed of smashed ceramics and reconstructing them into 17 partial vessels. The first thing is that all of these vessels date to the late 8th century, most likely of a style that was produced around 780. Give or take a couple decades on each side of that. And you can see the drawings of some of these vessels. These are actually really nice vessels. Ceramic drums, polychrome bowls, ceramic masks, figurines. These are really nice vessels, but they've all been smashed. Let's go from drawings to actual photographs. Here is what these vessels actually look like. An almost intact ceramic drum, ceramic masks, these beautiful sort of leopard print bowls. Really nice stuff, but not stuff that is placed reverentially like in Burial 21. The materials were dramatically smashed. And indeed, I looked through these hundreds of sherds. The vessels aren't even intact. So that suggests that these vessels were smashed elsewhere, and simply most of them were then placed in preparation for the construction of this palace. Now, that's a very neat drum. Enough of that drum survived that I was able to commission a reproduction of that drum right up above me. And I have played that drum at academic meetings. It's a really neat drum. It's currently in the display case right in the hallway over there, which you can't see, but trust me, it's a cool drum. So what do we know about these ceramics? These are not being specially placed. They're not being placed around the individual in some sort of funerary offering to accompany them into the other life. No, these are deliberately smashed vessels. In other words, there was some huge feast, and at the end of this feast, they took these beautiful vessels, ceramic drums and masks and polychrome bowls and these huge oyas where they were probably fermenting honey, and they smashed them. They deliberately smashed them. In other words, they are sacrificing these vessels to the soul of the house. And if they are breaking and sacrificing these ceramic vessels, they are breaking and sacrificing people. And this is our hypothesis for what Burial 19 can tell us. So we have a biological male, aged likely between 21 and 30 years of age, probably someone of elite status with a traumatic injury to the cervical vertebra. In other words, a war captive, a young noble warrior captured in war, dragged to El Peru-Waka, and fed to a building. They sacrificed him along with all of these beautiful ceramics to dedicate this new palace. So here is our working hypothesis that Burial 19, as well as Burial 18, Burial 19 is a late 8th century war captive sacrificed to dedicate the newly constructed elite residence of N14-2. All right? And this is what archaeology does. We approach the archaeological record with a hypothesis, and we then look on how we can test this hypothesis against the record. Now, we're going to return to this hypothesis eventually, but keep this in your brain as we move through this discussion. Okay, here's a photograph of that ancestor shrine with Burial 21 is located in, structure M1415. So actually, let's talk about what archaeology is. Like, what is archaeology, and like, what's the point of archaeology, and how does one actually do archaeology? And basically, the way it works is this. What is archaeology? In North America, archaeology is generally considered to be one of the 4 subdivisions of anthropology. The other being cultural anthropology, physical anthropology, and linguistics. Archaeology is not a distinct science in itself. Viewed primarily as a methodology, archaeology is the scientific methodology that investigates the human past through the medium of the archaeological record. And archaeology kind of awkwardly straddles both the hard sciences and the softer social sciences, because our object of study is, in fact, human culture, past human civilizations that leave behind their archaeological record. Okay, what is the archaeological record? There it is. The archaeological record, as opposed to the written record of the human past, consists of humanity's extant material culture and its resultant impact on the environment. The archaeological record consists of artifacts, ecofacts, architecture, features, and any significant material trace of a past human presence on a natural, or man-made landscape. Man-made landscape, that's what we're talking about with the ruined city of El Peru-Waka. So we pose questions to the archaeological record. And a successful archaeology will do this through the use of the scientific method. And it uses this to create a scientific archaeology. And here's the scientific method as applies to the archaeological record. And it works the same in archaeology as it does in chemistry or physics or biology or any of the harder sciences. Step 1, formulate a hypothesis. Burial 19 is a war captive from the 8th century, sacrificed and fed to the newly constructed palace of N14-2. Develop a methodology to answer this hypothesis. If this is a human sacrifice, then we should find similar types of sacrifices in similar types of structures. Step 3, apply the methodology to the archaeological record. Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look around for similar structures and see if we can find similar types of burials. 4, publish the result in a timely manner. And this is often the big hang-up archaeologists usually have. They don't publish enough. I have tried to publish quite a bit, and if you sort of look me up online, I'm not hard to find. I generally churn out between 3 to 5 papers every year, not just conference presentations or poster presentations, but articles in academic journals, chapters in edited volumes, and my own edited volume that you can see over there. My first edited volume that I wrote with Jennifer Lowe-Miller-Cardinal, someone much more talented and smarter than myself. And what we did in that volume was to look at tobacco. One of the main things we were looking at is these things known as poison flasks, these tiny little ceramic flasks. And our working hypothesis was that these are not poison bottles or poison flasks. They are actually containers for tobacco. And this hypothesis came out of glyphs that are painted on the sides of some of these vessels, which say, this ceramic vessel is the home of powdered tobacco. So then Jennifer tried to look at what would be the chemical signature that we can find from this. If these are houses of tobacco, if these are tobacco flasks, then she should be able to chemically locate nicotine in the residue inside these bottles. And that is, in fact, exactly what she found. And we were able to convincingly demonstrate that these tiny little ceramic flasks that fit very comfortably in your hand, these are, in fact, tobacco. These are for flasks for tobacco powder, probably for snuff or just powdered tobacco that you can then roll up and smoke. All right. And we did this by studying the classic Maya. And let's pause for a moment and actually ask, who are the Maya? Who are the Maya? Okay. That's a Maya girl. Okay. So who are the Maya? The Maya are a current series of Native American nations. A lot of people think the Maya kind of vanished into thin air in the 9th century. This is not true. Present tense, the Maya are among the largest of all Native American groups, currently numbering somewhere between 6 and 9 million individuals. It depends on how you count them. The Maya are roughly divided into 22 distinct ethno-linguistic groups scattered across the countries of North America. The largest of these groups is in southern Mexico, the Yucatec, and there's about 2.5 million Yucatec, but fully half of all Maya live in their old heartland, which is the modern nation of Guatemala. And this is roughly about 7.1 million individuals. This is a very large Native American group. And these are the Maya today. Almost 1 million Maya now live in the United States, as best as we can figure. And the Maya are a very successful Native American group. But the Maya are perhaps best known for the height of their pre-Columbian civilization, called the Classic Maya. The Classic Maya consists of the period between AD 200 and AD 1000 in the rainforests and semi-arid scrub forests of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, the Classic Maya was a highly advanced civilization, possibly even the most complex and most technologically advanced of all Native American peoples. They had an advanced calendric system, they had a highly complex mathematical system, they had a fully literate script, fantastic art, fantastic architecture, and all of this can be studied, and this is what the field of classic Maya archaeology actually studies. I'll show you one example of this. Here's this absolutely masterpiece of Maya art, Yaxchilan Lintel 23, and it has glyphs and it has naturalistic figures, and we know the people in this piece of artwork in the lintel because there are Maya glyphs that describe them and describe what they're doing. And if you study, you can actually read these ancient Maya pieces of work. There are dictionaries about Maya glyphs. There's books that will teach you how to read Maya glyphs. You can go to Austin to attend the University of Texas at Austin's a very good glyphic school, probably the best glyphic school in the country. And you can actually read the scenes that are being depicted on these artistic masterworks. And what we see from Yaxchilan Lintel 23, the kneeling figure there, that is the queen of the city of Piedras Negras, Lady Shock. And she is conjuring from the fire, from the smoking fire issuing forth from blood-spattered paper. She is conjuring the war god, the Washaklahun Uba Khan. And she's summoning the war god to ask its advice and for it to lend its help for her husband, who's about to go into battle to fight the wars of Piedras Negras. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about art and architecture and glyphic writing and all of this incredible stuff produced by this highly advanced civilization. Now, the civilization itself consisted of about 40 or so city-states which were scattered across the rainforests of Central America. And each of these city-states was locked into a complex political relationship and economic networks with each other. Almost every single city-state possessed its own royal court, centered on the royal line of kings and queens, and each of these individuals inherited political authority and unique relations with both the numinous and the supernatural. The kings and queens possessed special supernatural abilities, like Lady Shock, to conjure forth these gods and spirits to aid the people of their city. And one of these cities was El Peru-Waka. And there is, in fact, the glyphic emblem for the city. Now, El Peru-Waka itself has been under excavation since 2003 by the Proyecto Arqueológico Waka, PA. Now, the settlement itself is located in northwestern Guatemala in the Laguna del Tigre National Park. And the city itself is, the modern name of the site is El Peru because it was discovered by a guy from Peru. So originally they just called it Las Ruinas de El Peru, the ruins of the Peruvian. But the ancient name is Huac, all right? And Huac is the ancient Mayan name for the giant tropical centipede, Scolopendra gigantea. Hence, El Peru-Waka, in its ancient name glossed into English, is the city of the centipede. And this is all located in the Laguna del Tigre National Park, a national park of surpassing beauty. It is truly one of the great rainforests of Central America, a highly threatened rainforest in Central America, but a place that it's very difficult to work, a place of incredible natural beauty. It is one of the refuges of the Central American jaguar. And jaguars have been sighted throughout the Petén, throughout northern Guatemala, and very large jaguars have been found inside the ruined city. Now, I've never seen a jaguar, even though I did get stalked, I think, by one once. But there are jaguars present in the rainforest. All right. A few years ago, a group of naturalists actually tranquilized. That's not a picture of the guys that were at Guatemala, but it is a picture of what they did. They tranquilized the cat to take readings. It was something like an 80-kilogram male. It was a gigantic cat. But also present in the rainforest are not just the big cats and the deers and the tepesquitles and the sereques and the all of the animals of the rainforest. There's also really big bugs, including the Scolopendra gigantea, the namesake of the city itself. These giant venomous centipedes. I would not recommend doing what that individual is doing because the bite of the Scolopendra gigantea is highly venomous and it can in fact kill you. So don't let it crawl on your arm. And yes, they have been sighted in the rainforest. That they come out at night, they're probably not going to bite you. Probably. All right. Now, the Maya built the city of El Peru-Waka in the 4th century, consolidating a number of older settlements at the junction of the Rio San Juan and Rio San Pedro Martir. And this confluence of the rivers served as a major trade route, and the city itself thrived for the next 7 centuries. And it was only abandoned at some point in the 11th century. So it was also a very late city as well. And it was a fairly major city. El Peru-Waka possessed all the hallmarks of classic civilization. There's over 50 known stelae, there's an elaborate royal court, there's big pyramids, a densely nucleated urban core, and fairly high population numbers. 30, 40, 50,000 people would easily be at home within the realm of El Peru-Waka. It's perhaps most famous for the 8 major tombs discovered by Pau and the breakthroughs in deciphering these patterns of the classic Maya urban tradition. And there's one of the stela of the city right up above me, the very well-preserved El Peru-Waka, Stela 34, which shows one of the rulers of the city, Lady Cabell, and her magic dwarf. I want a magic dwarf. I don't have a magic dwarf. But yeah, the Laguna del Tigre forest is a spectacular place. This is in fact a photograph that I took from a watchtower placed on top of one of the largest pyramids. I mean, you can just see the entire rainforest sprawled out ahead of you. And it's hard to see, but underneath all of those trees are the ruins of this huge city. And here's what the most recent map of those ruins actually looks like. We have basically 11 urban neighborhoods sort of scattered around the site core, sort of underneath the current rainforest canopy. And when you move inside the site core itself, we see that the site core is densely nucleated with compounds and residences and neighborhoods kind of cheek by jowl, all piled one on top of the other. Now, on the whole, if we had to describe the site core in a nutshell, basically it seems to have about a dozen really large palaces, these big elite residential compounds, with smaller residences and commoner neighborhoods kind of sandwiched in between them, all around the great central plaza of Plaza 1. And we are going to look at 2 of these big palaces, the Grupo Tolok and the Grupo Choc. The Grupo Choc we've already met. That's the one that had the ancestor shrine of M1415 and the palatial residence of N142. But we're also going to look at the Grupo Choc, which is a much larger affair. That's the map of it right up above my head that I excavated over about a 6 or a 7 year period, on and off. Now, basically, with these large domestic spaces, the sprawling aggregations of patios and structures and clustered workshops and kitchens and dormitories, as well as masonry residences and reception halls and elaborate ritual architecture. I mean, the Grupo Choc has its own pyramid. The palaces of the urban core, these dozen or so palaces, do not really resemble traditional Maya social units. There wasn't really anything that looked like this when modern anthropology began to arrive in the Maya region in the 19th century. A traditional Maya structure is a patrilineage unit, sort of a central farmhouse in the center with all of these little farms kind of scattered all around the residence of the eldest, most senior male. That's not what we have when we look at the urban core. We've got these things, all right? So what are these things, all right? We start with a hypothesis because we're going to use the scientific method. Here is our hypothesis, that these are noble houses. And our hypothesis is the noble house model, which is partially derived from the work of Rosemary Joyce and Susan Gillespie. So let's actually argue, like, what is a house? What is a noble house? All right, there's our definition right up above. A noble house is a corporate body with a central elite family attached to numerous units through blood or tradition. The elite conjugal unit is defined by bilocal residence patterns and bilateral descent. Bilateral descent means they trace descent through both the male and the female line. And there is a rough model that I made of a noble house there on the lower left, that you have your elite family in the center, and it is surrounded by clients, by lesser relations, by dependents, servants, and slaves, all bound together in this noble house. So, okay, there's our hypothesis. Now we have to develop a methodology to test this hypothesis. And here's our methodology. So if we go looking for a house in the archaeological record, this is what we should find. Large compounds with extensive domestic space, nucleated clusters of residences, a central residence compound with elite inhabitants, and those elite inhabitants should possess a significant disparity of wealth and status. After all, you have the lord living in one part of the compound and the slaves and servants living in the other. All of these will be entrenched and they will participate in a competitive status economy as the different noble houses are competing against each other, both within the royal court of the city as well as neighboring royal courts. And everything in this huge compound should have a shared occupational sequence for the internal units. After all, if the central family goes extinct, the servants and slaves should not hang around afterwards. And if the servants and slaves fritter away, then the elite unit at the center itself should fall apart. And central to this is the idea of bilocal residence and bilateral descent. How could we study bilateral descent and bilocal residence patterns in the archaeological record? How would this manifest itself? Well, one of the ways it might manifest itself is in paired burials. Exactly the type of burials we saw in the ancestor shrine of M1415. We have burial 20 and burial 21, two elite individuals buried together. And we see the same thing in the western part of the structure. Burial 22 and 23, two individuals interned together. And let's focus in on two of those burials, burials 20 and 21. Remember, 21 is where that really nice Eek-style vase came from. Here are the maps of the paired burials of 20 and 21. Now, stratigraphically, these are associated, so they are placed at the same time. These are elite interments of elderly individuals possessing numerous high-quality funerary goods. Now, the bones here, as you can see from the maps, were not very well preserved at all, and they were probably scattered when the cysts collapsed in antiquity. But from elsewhere in the Maya region, these are generally male-female pairings and likely represent a married elite couple, all right? And it's not just that we have a single pair of twinned interments in M1415. We have two sets of twinned interments. And this seems to fit bilateral descent patterns. Bilateral descent patterns trace kinship through both the male and the female lines. And in honoring both parents, burying them together, paired burials seem to be a marker of bilateral descent among the classic era nobility. And again, you generally don't find paired burials in normal traditional Maya social units. Now, let's see if we can find other examples of paired burials. So let's move to the much larger and much more elaborate chalk group. Now, the chalk group is clearly an elite palace. This placed it in the highest echelons of classic society. Inside the city of El Peru-Waka, there's only a single palace more elaborate than the chalk group, and that's the royal palace itself. But the chalk group is quite fancy. It possesses 3 uncarved stela. It possesses elite sculpture. It possesses palace quality ceramics, jade, obsidian, and it even has one of the city's 8 major tombs, Burial 38, which was located in the ancestor shrine pyramid of M1312. That's M1312 is right there. Okay, let's actually go inside this tomb. This is what the tomb looked like. Figure 5. This is Burial 38. And we can see the body was removed in antiquity. I think I excavated this in 2007, 2008. Okay. The body was actually removed in antiquity after being reduced to skeletal elements. So we couldn't tell if this was male or female at all. But we know that the tomb was not looted because all they took were the bones and left only fragments of the human remains inside the tomb. All of the treasures of the tomb, the jade and the ceramics, all of these were left. And Burial 38 was a very nice tomb. It was a very rich, something I call near royal tomb, because it didn't have any direct indicators of royal status, but it had a lot of really, really nice stuff. It possessed 12 elaborate vessels, including that gorgeous cormorant polychrome you can see. It possessed 109 carved spindle whorls. You can see them right up above me, which is, as best as I can guess, the largest concentration of spindle whorls known in the Maya region. It possessed the remains of a mosaic jade death mask, which is currently being reconstructed in Guatemala City. And it bore a strong resemblance to an even richer tomb, El Peru-Waka Burial 39. Which is one of the richest tombs ever found in the Maya region. So whoever this individual was, man or woman, they were a very senior member of classic Maya society. And their relatives were also very highly placed. And in my excavations across the Grupo Cholak, I ended up excavating a total of 24 burials all across this palace. These individuals buried in the interior of these palaces, including a number of paired burials. But before I get to the paired burials, let's stop and look at one of the ancestor shrines, N13-9. And N13-9 was an ancestor shrine that was very, very interesting because it possessed a thick floor and another thick layer of burned material. There was a lot of ritual activity going on at structure N13-9. And one of the interments associated with N13-9 is that individual right there, El Peru-Waka Burial 64. And 64 was an interment that had seen a lot of violence. You can see from my map right up above me. This is an individual who was disarticulated, all right? They were broken up and decapitated, and the long bones of the body stacked with the skull placed on top. And as you can see, a stone axe, this laha, buried in the left side of the cranium. And all of this placed on an offering bowl. Let's do the same sort of osteological analysis we did for Burial 19. The individual was a biological male, likely between 21 and 50 years of age, with 21 to 30 being the most likely. They were interred under a staircase, just like Burial 19. And this individual was decapitated and then left with a stone axe embedded in the left portion of the cranium. And then that was placed on a bowl, and then that bowl was placed on a stacked pile of femurs and tibias and humeruses and radiuses and ulnas. So they basically cut off this individual's limbs, stacked them, chopped his head off, left an axe in his head, put the head in a bowl, and stacked it right on top of his severed limbs. This is an obvious human sacrifice, okay? And if we compare the similarities to Burial 19, it helps confirm our original hypothesis that I talked about half an hour ago, that Burial 19 was also a human sacrifice. Also in the 8th century, which is really interesting. But let's go back to these 24 burials. do we have any paired burials in the Grupo Choc? And the answer is yes, we have 12 of them. Half of all the burials I excavated at the Choc group were paired burials, including the paired burials of burials 78 and 79. Here's my illustration of them right here. And again, we see the similarities with burials 20 and 21 and 22 and 23. We have two individuals stratigraphically associated. They are elite interments. They are both elderly individuals, although again, the bones were too badly deteriorated to allow any determination of biological sex. They contained numerous high-quality funerary goods, and they are probably an elite married couple interned together and associating with, honoring both the descent of the mother and the father, thus being an archaeological indicator of bilateral descent. Here's another pair of burials from the Choc group, burials 99 and 100, and we could tell biological sex here. This is male and one of them is female. They are stratigraphically associated. There it is an elite interment. It is an elderly individual. And I want to point out that the burial 99 individual there on the left, that guy stood 161 centimeters. So this guy was a Maya guy who was just over 6 feet, which is very tall by Native American standards, especially in Mesoamerica. Now, these two burials contained numerous high-quality funerary goods, and again, they are likely a married couple. And in being buried together, their descendants are honoring both the male and the female line of descent. Paired burials have not been found outside of palace compounds. Up on the upper left, that's the paired burials of the Tolok group. On the right are the paired burials of the Choc group. This is a likely indicator of bilateral descent, and thus these are the interments of the elite conjugal unit at the center of our hypothesized classic Maya noble house. So now we have another hypothesis, that the paired burials located in these elite residential compounds represent bilateral descent, and thus they help support the idea that the social unit inhabiting this compound was a noble house. Now, this supports what we know of classic Maya society from the art and the epigraphy, which is that this is an ancient Native American society that is characterized by powerful noble families, and that we have at least two different types of social units present at the ancient city of El Peru-Waka. And these two social units were in fact probably, not the only ones there. Yes, we've got noble houses. Yes, we have communities of lineages, the sort of traditional Maya social unit, but there are probably even more social variety present in the ancient city. And so what seems to emerge is an urban landscape characterized by social heterogeneity, different types of social units inside the same ancient society. Noble houses, lineages, kind of all co-inhabiting the same social landscape. And this idea may help explain one of the more unusual features of the city itself, because it's long been noted at El Peru-Waka that we have a tradition of twinned tombs. That among these great tombs uncovered in the ancient city, each tomb we find seems to have a corresponding tomb, and the tombs seem to be oriented towards one another across the landscape. We have burial 8, seems to be oriented towards a contemporary burial, burial 37. Burial 38 seems oriented towards a contemporaneous burial, burial 39. And if paired burials in the palaces represent married couples, it is quite possible that the twinned tombs across the ancient city represent married royalty, who are sort of defining themselves as the conjugal unit of the great house that is the city itself. And again, here we have some of these alignments. Burial 8 in the Royal Palace seems pointed towards Burial 37 in structure M1332. Burial 38 in M1312 seems oriented to Burial 39 in the Great Pyramid of 01404. If the paired burials are acting like the twinned tombs, we can see kind of one of the rationales for the whole of Maya political organization, that the royal families are presenting themselves as the elite conjugal unit of the house, which represents the entire state. Just as the nobles buried their descendants in paired burials, the royals are burying themselves in twinned tombs, declaring that they are the central family for the great house that is the city-state itself. Or at least that is the working hypothesis. And of course, I pretend like this is my research, like I am out there doing this. This is actually not true at all. This is the result of many different people working together. Some of the most important, of course, being the students. The students that we take down to Guatemala that help us sort through 1,000 different artifacts, sorting them into 100 different types. Here are some of the students that I've worked with in the past, from Tulane, from Bloomberg University, from the Universidad de San Carlos, from Tyler Junior College. Here are the students I took 1 year to the great city of Tikal, volunteering their time in return for firsthand access to the archaeological record of Mesoamerica. And it is a lot of work, and we do have a lot of fun. But ultimately, it is work. And together, we are generating hypotheses, we are testing hypotheses, we are supporting hypotheses, we are invalidating hypotheses, and we are creating knowledge about the ancient American past. Gracias por su atención.